Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In the debate today, we'll be taking a look at two stories. The first segment of our show today is concerning India-Pakistan relations with specific reference to our relations concerning water disputes as well. Pakistan will be raising objections over 10 Indian hydro projects, something that it has done in the past as well. And it is going to do that at the annual meeting of the Permanent Commission on Indus Waters, which is going to be held from today onwards till the 3rd in Islamabad. This, of course, is under the treaty, the annual meeting between both the countries. It has to happen before the 31st of March. The previous one was held in India. We know that, of course, this is of major concern to Pakistan with reference to, of course, our water access and the way that we're going to develop further in terms of the power projects that India plans to construct. And this, of course, has a huge impact on our access to the water supply as well. Something that has been raised on different platforms and, of course, with regards to the World Bank as well, who has halted in terms of its contribution to this issue, which of course puts Pakistan at a position where it really needs to make an effort in terms of getting what it needs and deserves. We'll be taking a look at how this meeting is going to proceed further and whether or not we're going to get some tangible outcomes, because of course these concerns have been raised in the past, and what other options do we have and the kind of impact that it's going to put on Pakistan's access to these water resources and of course the economy in general. For our second segment, we're going to be taking a look at the situation in Afghanistan, which is worsening by the day. We know that there is a humanitarian crisis and an economic crisis happening in Afghanistan. We know that people are suffering from extreme poverty. There is so much of concern that is going on. But something that, of course, puts a highlight on all of these issues is that now people are resorting to selling their organs, specifically their kidneys, in order to meet the requirements of their daily lives, which, of course, is very, very tragic. We, of course, know that this has been something that has been going on for a while now, so much so that a certain area has also been named one kidney village, which means that a large population of that village has actually gone on and sold their kidneys, and most of them live on one kidney now, which of course puts this whole scenario into question as well in terms of what the regulation is, what sort of care is provided, how there is access to medical care for the people of Afghanistan. Is there any care in terms of after donation of the organ, which of course is needed for the person who's donating their organ, and if this market and supply is actually being regulated as well or not, because of course this means that the people in Afghanistan are being exploited as well, on top of what they're suffering and what they're having to choose to do. They've been selling their kidneys for as low as $1,500, which of course amounts to nothing. We're going to talk about this in further detail and then also try and see what more can be done in terms of urgently trying to address the issue that is currently gripped Afghanistan. These two segments will be there in our show today in the debate. In studios, we have with us, of course, Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, as always. And we're going to be joined online for our first segment, Mr. Shiraz Jameen, who's a former Additional Commissioner for Indus Waters, Pakistan. And he's joined us online on Skype. Thank you very much, Mr. Shiraz, for being with us. Before we continue our discussion on this segment, let's take a look at a small package that has been prepared by our team, and then we'll continue.
The Indus Water Treaty was signed in 1960. Due to Pakistan's efforts, the treaty has survived the pressure of diplomatic and military tensions between the two countries. However, in recent times, due to the increase in upstream water infrastructure projects, there is a looming threat of water conflict in the subcontinent. A 10-member delegation headed by the Indian Commissioner for Indus Waters arrived via Wagah border to attend the annual Pakistan Commission for Indus Waters meeting being organized by the Office of Pakistan's Commissioner for Indus Waters. Pakistan had previously raised concern on the construction of the 1000 megawatt Pakal Dul and 48 megawatt Lower Kalnai hydropower projects. According to media reports, in this meeting, the Pakistani commissioner will raise concerns over the construction of 10 hydroelectric power projects: Durbuk Sheok, Nimuchiling, Kiru, Tamasha, Kalarus 2, Baltikulan Small, Kargil Hundarman, Phagla, Kulan Ramwari, and Mandi. Under the agenda items of the meeting, the participants will discuss arrangements regarding communication of advance information about flood flows during the current season, maintenance of free flow of water into Sutlej River, and finalization of future programs, meetings, and tours and inspections. Will this be the start of a long diplomatic effort to avert conflict? We will have to wait and watch.
Well, you heard in the package that, of course, what seems to be at the core of this issue, and something that we're going to explore further in our discussion as well. My question to you, Mr. Shiraz, is with reference to the roots of this conflict. In terms of what we see today and the kind of objections that we're raising today, of course, with reference to the power projects that are being developed on the Indian side, this, of course, takes us back to where it all started. What seems to be at the core of this issue? Mr. Shiraz, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Please go ahead.
Actually, the Indus Water Treaty provides a design criteria which India is to follow while designing these projects on our western rivers. Though they mostly go on, they follow the design criteria, but sometimes they go exceed with this design criteria, and we observe obviously they are bound to provide the designs of these projects before construction. So we analyze these designs with the design criteria provided in the treaty, and if we found any exceeds, we must we made objections. And as you mentioned, there's 10 projects. We have some minor side of type of objections on these projects. I hope these in this present meeting, they certainly go for
Right.
some resolution, but not.
All right.
Right, Shirazab, since we are talking about the designs, just could you clarify what exactly seems to be the problem in design? I understand that usually it was about the ability to store water or not. But with the Pakaldul, we saw that 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Pakistan raised the question of its height and requested that it be brought down by 5 feet. So, do you think that it is merely about storage or catchment areas, or it is also about height as well?
Height is relevant with the storage. The more the height, the more will be the storage. But India is allowed to construct some storage on our western rivers, and this Pakaldul is within the that limit provided in the treaty for the Chenab River. It is on a tributary of the Chenab River, and India is allowed to construct some storage on the tributary of the Chenab River. So the main problem is with the positioning of a spillway. Actually, the positioning of a spillway provides a lever to India to handle this water at their own will. So we are
Right.
always object on the positioning of the spillways. So
Right, and
it
that is
provides
very
a.
important. I understand that through that they can block. Now it is in Ladakh and on a tributary of Chenab, and Chenab is eventually culminates into our main Indus. So what exactly would be the nature of our objections then?
We already objected on this. Nature is a similar on all the projects. We object on the positioning of spillways. The pondage provided in there is a limit of pondage for every project with reference to the inflow at the site of the project. India sometimes
Right.
exceeds with that for pondage. So the pondage means some storage.
Mr. Shiraz, with regards to these objections, we understand that this is something that has been raised previously as well. And this time around, it's been happening again. And perhaps the number of projects and the kind of issues that we have keep on increasing as well. What exactly needs to be done about it? Because we have this meeting, of course, and it's an annual mandatory meeting that we must have. But is it really giving us the kind of progress and results that we need in terms of actual action? Because we raise objections, and then what?
Yes, these are very regular kind of objections, and I think these objections can be resolved at the level of the commission. But as you understand that both the relations of the both countries have a pressure on the both commissioners of the both sides, so they feel some type of limitation to advancing for the advancement of these resolutions, and it takes time. By the time in some time they said they may offer a change of the design as they done in the previous projects, and I hope these are not very serious type of objections, and it can be, these can be resolved in the
But will
meetings
they?
of the commission, and we may not.
Right. Based on your own experience, sir, your own experience, there are instances when our concerns were incorporated and these issues were addressed.
Yeah, yeah, it was done in the previous, in in the first large project on the Chenab, there was a major objections. There were major objections on from our side, and these were resolved at the level of not at the level of the commission, because as I told you that commissioner feels some limitation while discussing each other, but at a higher level, the Salal dispute was resolved at the level of the both the foreign ministers in 1978.
Sharasab, increasing the control by the Indians on two rivers, especially Jhelum and Chenab. Do you think that systematically they can wage a hydro terrorism on Pakistan? I you know Opening the gates of the waters, because it was discussed in the past as well that floods can occur through systematically controlling the waters of these two rivers of Pakistan. And if it happens like that, and could we take them to the international level to probe that?
Right, and just to mention here that not only flooding but also droughts can be caused as
Exactly.
well.
Sure.
And there seems to be a concern that Pakistan is a lower riparian country. So, as a lower riparian country, what exactly can Pakistan do apart from going to these bodies?
The, so far, India do not have any major storages on Chenab and Jhelum River, and not they are not allowed to large storages. This flooding or drought can be created by large storages. They are allowed with the only pondage, as a limited pondage, which cannot. If they opt for that, series of stoppages on all in all the projects, and our series of releases in all the projects, the India will be with much on the large side losing. So will be their hydropower project production by this practice. So I don't think they go for any this practice, and till the construction of large storage, which is not allowed, and we are watching very every time on their progress of the project we visit after construction. So so far they do not, as I mentioned, they do not have any major storages which can threat to our any for any flooding or droughts.
All right.
But
Mr. Shiraz, with the reference to what you spoke earlier, you were saying that perhaps not at the commissioner's level, but at the foreign minister's level, something did happen in the past where our objections were taken care of. But in terms of moving forward, when we see, of course, the regime in India right now is deteriorating within India as well, and leaves very little hope for any real change. When we talk about moving forward and how we're going to take this in terms of making sure that we get what we want, can we potentially also engage with third parties or platforms such as the World Bank? I understand there is a pause in its mediation, but can there be a point where we actually engage them again?
yeah, the treaty provides a self mechanism for the third party. In case of technical objections, we can go to the neutral expert, which is to be appointed by the World Bank. And in case of legal objections, we can go for court of arbitration. It is not a permanent body. It can be created with the help of World Bank and other UN and other bodies, as was done in the Kishanganga case. So there is a self mechanism provided in the treaty. So it is very elaborative, and it is very functional. As we opt for neutral expert in the case of Baglia, and neutral expert changed the design of the Baglia Dam, and India adopted that design. It is so the mechanism. It's the treaty is very much it's elaborative and it's functional, and India is obeying, I think. as was done in the case of Bagaliar and Kishanganga, and I hope that there is we cannot we do not have any need to go to any other third party in the presence
All
of
right.
the Indus Water
Shiraz
Treaty and its.
Last question. Yes,
Shiraz
Faisal.
Sahab, could you please tell us about which are the rivers that are originating from the western part of Tibet? And in that case, if something goes wrong, obviously with the western rivers of Pakistan, could there be a role played by China as well in coming future?
Yes, the Indus and the Satluj originates from the Tibet, Mansarovar Lake in the middle of the Tibet, where where China has constructed some many hydropower projects, but it is a very limited water which originates from the Tibet. The most part of the Indus is originates from the Indian occupied Ladakh and Kargil, and it is about 12%, and the remaining 88% of the Indus is our catchment. So we do not have any
Just to clarify.
problem with the Indus River.
Right.
However,
Sana, I
Sure.
understand.
Yes.
I understand, Sana, you said that
It's okay.
it was last question, but I'm just going to go ahead with another. Sir, just to clarify, while talking to you, the impression that I'm getting is that everything is hunky-dory. But if I remember past 5 years, 6 years, 10 years actually, repeatedly there have been issues and Pakistan ended up with the neutral mediator as well, sir, or technical mediator. Don't you think that there must be certain serious concerns as well, especially now that Pakistan has flagged 10 more projects?
Out of these 10 projects, the only 2 are major projects, and the remaining 8 are the very minor and projects. So they do not have any downstream effect. And as you mentioned, only we opt for the neutral expert only in the case of Bagaliar. And for Kishanganga, we opt for court of arbitration. And it is a very obvious that whenever we do not reach to any agreement, we can go to third party of neutral expert, either neutral expert or court of arbitration.
Shiraz Sahab, though they are small projects, are they still hindering the flow of the water of the rivers?
No, not at all.
No.
Not at all. We are receiving the amount of water which we were receiving in 1960s in these in the 3 of our rivers which are allocated to Pakistan. Obviously, the remaining 3 eastern rivers were allocated to India, and it is a blessing that we are receiving waters in the Ravi River, which is not our part, which is not our share. But that as they are now not using all the waters of the Ravi, they are releasing in the Ravi River 3 to 4 mf annually, which is not our share. And
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Shiraz Jamil. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this segment, but thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insights with regards to what really needs to be done and how these projects are impacting us. Farrukh, but overall, when we look at this issue, we understand that the water concerns, as you mentioned, have been there in the past and have affected India and Pakistan's relations. Moving forward in the future, do you think that this can also develop as a major fault line between both the countries?
Obviously, I think while Shiraz Sahab was being very generous, I think that it has been a concern that Pakistan has repeatedly flagged, and we know that back in 2017-18, Narendra Modi actually brought forward the idea of scuttling Indus Water Treaty, which of course works perfectly if we actually agree on the principles, right? But the question at this moment is, if everything is hunky-dory, why did we end up before arbitration, right? Why did we go for technical experts or the third-party arbitration? These are important questions because India is too boorish, and we know since 2014 their attitude has been extremely condescending. And I'm not talking about Indus Water Commission from their side or commissioners. I'm talking about their politicians, because at this moment Indian politicians are actually suffering from foot and mouth disease, right? They repeatedly make strange statements, and that actually can create a lot of problem. But here's the technical problem that we have been facing. Every time we ended up before a arbitration commission, India used to go and say that we are developing all these projects because this water is actually going to the oceans, right? Pakistan should have actually created something, but Pakistan doesn't. And repeatedly, we have also seen domestic pushback whenever we had a project. First, it was about Kalabagh, then repeatedly other projects as well. It seems that India on one side was complaining that Pakistan doesn't build dams and it keeps on objecting to ours. On the other side, it was sponsoring or supporting certain elements in Pakistan which were opposed to it. So that used to create a lot of problem. But now finally we have started developing these projects, and hopefully in coming days we'll have more management of water. Then we can expose India's rhetoric and lies.
Absolutely. We only have time now to move on for the second segment. So Faisal, I'll take your input more on that as well. With reference to what is going on in Afghanistan, I understand that the humanitarian crisis and economic crisis we've been talking about has been reiterated again and again. But with what is going on in terms of people resorting to selling their organs and kidneys is tragic on another level. And I don't know if this is being looked at in the same way that I feel. I welcome in the debate Tariq Farhadi, who's an Afghan affairs expert. Thank you very much, Mr. Farhadi, for joining us. And I hope that your smile can lighten up the mood in the debate for now, because what we've seen in terms of what's happening and how a village is being named as a one kidney village points to the fact that it's really, really sad that people have to resort to such a thing and really don't see any other option for themselves and their children. Is this something that is being ignored by the international community at large, or is not given enough importance? Or is there something invisible that perhaps is more important, is more significant, that we can't really see or understand, and this is something that's happening for the greater good? Because I don't see it.
Greetings. Yes, unfortunately, the international community on August 15th, once the former government's president fled Afghanistan, decided to cut all aid that it was giving. It was giving about $8 billion of aid each year, $4.5 billion in budget aid and development aid, and about $4 billion in military aid and salaries, etc. So all of this was trickling in, and a situation of poverty that has existed for a long time in Afghanistan was masked. And but once the aid dropped with the drought and all the situation of the government employees not being paid, it's like if we lost our salary today, what would we do? I mean, in these countries, people don't have savings. Their savings, unfortunately, is their kidney. That they use once, and then that also gets spent, that amount, or they sell their children. That tragedy has happened in Afghanistan. Now,
Brother Tariq,
yes.
Yeah, Brother Tariq, we are obviously, watching Western media constantly, and we know that Ukrainian crisis is very well and effectively looked into, especially with the perspective of sufferings people are suffering at the hands of the war. But when it comes to Afghanistan, we know that people of Afghanistan are suffering day by day, and that that menace is increasing day by day. But if we look at the Western stance on showing that to the world, it is declining, and that attention is not being paid to Afghanistan, especially when it comes to humanitarian crisis. But if we look at the current Taliban regime, there are things which are getting improved day by day. If we talk about the women education, universities has been opened. I think last week they've been opened, and though there are separate classes for females and males, but still they are opening it. If they are complying one by one with the world powers, then where is the problem? Why Western countries are still not looking into the humanitarian crisis of Afghanistan, sir?
First of all, the Ukrainian crisis is also an epic tragedy of our time because the war has started, but it can get worse, much worse, and we can see a lot more tragedy out of Ukraine, unfortunately, and it will change the world. A crisis that happens inside Europe, the border of Ukraine is the same distance in kilometers from Paris than Lisbon. If you measure Paris-Lisbon or Paris, the border of Ukraine is the same distance. So it's really inside Europe. This will change Europe. This will. Germany has already said it will invest money in an army, 2% of their GDP. Things are changing very fast. The minds are changing in Europe, and it will affect us, the southern hemisphere, as well. Afghanistan, the Taliban, unfortunately, has been very slow to do these things that we have been telling them right here in these interviews months ago. We spoke after the Islamic conference in Islamabad, the OIC conference, and we said, really, the OIC countries didn't recognize Taliban because they were not comfortable with their stance when it comes to women education and women's rights, etc. Now, months after that, they have done it. Great. The people I talk to in Afghanistan still have a lot of questions and worries about Taliban. A lot of unknowns. We can stay optimistic. We have no choice. We are, so to speak, journalists and intellectuals, but also we are, I think, given the gift of hope as human beings. So we have to have hope. But all the questions have not been answered in the Taliban government.
Farhadi Sahab, I totally get when you say that what is happening in Ukraine is unmitigated tragedy, and it is something that keeps on unfolding. But there is something that has been recently flagged by all media watchers. Particularly, you must have seen that video clip in which one reporter is actually telling that these countries, Ukraine is not like dilapidated third world countries, it is Europe, it is developed. And there seems to be an implicit bias that what happens in the backyards of civilization doesn't matter, that at the heart of civilization will matter whatever it is. So that actually becomes a huge problem, right? The question at this moment is, last time you were in this program, you also actually spoke about the hope that at least the monies that were divided, particularly the reserves, some of it will end up in Afghanistan pretty soon, and there will be some uplift. But we haven't seen any progress in that context, sir. Why is it that this scenario or this situation, this tragedy is totally being ignored?
Yes. First, my comment on the way the Ukrainian crisis has been seen by Western media. It is Western media, it is a Western crisis, and there are Western sympathies. So that is normal. These are things that these commentators think, and we thought the world was a rosy place, but the reality of the world just came out in words in those clips that you're referring to. So everybody knows what everybody thinks. You see, we just want to think that the world is a universal world. It is not. We know that. But nevertheless, the crisis in Ukraine could become very bloody because now we don't know what happens really. There is no resolution. These peace talks that have started could go on for months, for years, and the war can also go on for months. And refugees, right now, 5 million refugees are going to come out in the next year or two out of Ukraine. I mean, the war in Afghanistan, the Soviet invasion, created 7 million refugees, of which 3.5 million refugees came to Pakistan. Maybe more came to Pakistan and transited through Pakistan. These kinds of invasions.
Mr. Farhadi, with regards to what we were discussing earlier, of course, the situation in Afghanistan, I really want to also come back to that and see whether or not there is something that the present regime in Afghanistan can actually navigate and find a way through in whatever scenario they're currently in. Is it really are we really in a situation where it is that impossible for even perhaps to see and regulate practices such as organ selling, or being able to provide help where we can in terms of whatever scenario that we can change for the people of Afghanistan? Maybe perhaps we won't be able to give them more choices than to just sell their organs, but can we at least perhaps regulate the market or be able to see how to support them medically? Is this something that you think is in the capacity of the current regime with regards to whatever sanctions that exist in the current economic crisis that exists, or not?
And is allowing selling of organs in a poor country which is in crisis, does it not amount to any kind of exploitation, and shouldn't it be banned at all?
I mean, there shouldn't be a market for organs in this way out of poverty, and the government should ban it. In Afghanistan, the Taliban government should ban it. And on the other hand, is the government everywhere? That's the big question. This crisis of poverty and misery in Afghanistan is of a magnitude where this government cannot handle. And in fact, in some ways, they have said, we just freed Afghanistan from the occupiers, but the question of poverty, let the world solve that. They have said that in one of their speeches, which surprised a lot of people. But then we responded and we said, no, now if you are saying you are the government, you have to solve the crisis of poverty as the government. So we are in these kinds of back and forths with the government. It's a delicate conversation. Most of the time, 90% of the time, we have the impression that we talk and they don't really listen. As the international community, the Islamic countries talked with Taliban. Everybody talked with Taliban, but they don't listen too much. They have their own ideas, and they keep saying, we fought a very difficult war. We were in the mountains, and now it's our turn. This is what I've heard from them. So to get them from here to accept reasonable advice that we don't give to make the life of the Taliban easy, we give to make the life of the 39 million Afghans easy, because our people are there. I get a lot of heat in the interviews on why we want to fix things in Afghanistan, because a lot of people are mad at the Taliban and mad at the situation. We want to fix things in Afghanistan because we cannot take out 39 million Afghans to Europe. We have to fix Afghanistan with the people of Afghanistan in Afghanistan. And this is a challenge.
And I have another question on that, but we'll come to that later. Yes, Faisal.
Yeah, Mr. Fahadi, we can understand, out of poverty, people of Afghanistan, they are forced to even sell their own kidneys. They are vulnerable, and they are vulnerable to anything. If they are vulnerable to selling their kidneys, of course they will be vulnerable to being part of a terrorist organization like ISIS Khorasan as well, or which is considered as a backyard of Daesh. And very recently, about last week, MI5, who happens to be it's a spy agency of Britain, Ken McCallum, he highlighted the fact that in Afghanistan, in today's Afghanistan, people are fast joining the ISIS Khorasan, and they are a threat for the Western world. Don't you think that Western world should realize this now, and for their own larger interest, they should come and help vulnerable people of Afghanistan?
You see, in a country that is being driven to isolation, and left in poverty, anything can happen. And this is what happened during the years of the civil war in Afghanistan after 1993, and then the arrival of the Taliban. And we have experienced a very sad episode in our history. And then also there was a lot of poverty, but the media was not the same media as we have today with cell phones and Twitters and Facebooks, etc. So a lot of things in the past, a lot of tragedies went unreported, but it has existed before as well. Now, the West is in Afghanistan. Europe is spending money. The United States is spending money. It is not enough. It is not enough. And in March this month, there will be a donors conference for Afghanistan. I fear that there won't be enough money for Afghanistan because now the local crisis in Europe has public political support to help Europeans, and it's very difficult to put aside money for Afghanistan. We will see. We hope it can be done, but for me, the biggest worry now is that the biggest crisis now is justifyingly so Ukraine, and how to keep the attention on Afghanistan so we can keep international aid focused on Afghanistan.
Right. Mr. Farhadi, earlier you also said something with reference to the Taliban regime saying that they fought the war from the mountains and now it's their turn. But their turn to do what exactly? Because if they're in government, or as they say, then what they need to do is, of course, serve the people. Is the entire issue that we're discussing in Afghanistan stemming out of economic problems or also of competency issues?
They say it's their turn. This is what Mr. Mutaki has said. He is the spokesman in international fora, and he has said, look, in one of the interviews, he said after the fall of Taliban, we could go to Guantanamo or to the mountains or dissolve in nature because we were not part of the bond negotiations. We were supposed to disappear. So we disappeared and we went into the mountains and we fought, and now here we are 20 years ago, or 20 years later. Okay. But now governance is another thing than heroic speech. Governance is a responsibility. And competence, little by little, they are making decisions that show that the basics of administration are there, but a lot of blocks are not there yet. For instance, the Constitution, or
Right.
they have said in so many words, yes, the former Constitution is valid, but we are studying it. But there's a lot of doubts left.
Right.
So we hope that
That's a
everything
concern.
falls into place for the sake of the people of Afghanistan, for the sake of those families that you see in images that are really in poverty and they have not enough food
Right.
to eat,
And,
let alone
and
think
that is a
about
very
something else.
valid point, sir. The concern about this evolution of Taliban as a government is a serious one because if I sell my kidney is something that doesn't grow back. So once it is gone, it is gone. That becomes a problem whether people can wait that long or not. The concern again, and the question that I'm going to ask is about butterfly effect. Afghanistan had these bad practices of poppy cultivation, smuggling, umpteen other things, and human trafficking as well. Do you think that there is a possibility that there will be some kind of relapse if these things actually don't look up? And on the other side, while we are at it, and we are talking about what the West should be doing, do you see any scenario in which the Taliban regime as it stands today might get recognized by any of the countries in the world?
Regarding the poppy cultivation, etc., as long as there is poverty, as long as there is drought, and the only thing that grows in some areas of Afghanistan is poppy, and as long as there is a network of trafficking to richer markets of this poppy, I think it's very difficult to eradicate it. In fact, the West was in Afghanistan for 2 decades. It couldn't do it. So now there's no control over that. Yes, if the Taliban decided to ban it, they can, but what should the people eat? That's the question in rural areas. Your second question, I'm sorry, I missed your second question.
Recognition, a possibility of any country, any major country, recognizing Afghan Taliban as the legitimate government in its current form at all. Do you see any chance at all?
If the schools for the girls open in a month, as we expect, the universities for the girls have opened, women are allowed back to work fully, dressed however they are, but allowed back. One of the arguments of the Islamic countries was that this can be satisfied. Then the neighboring countries, including Pakistan, has recommended inclusive government, which means that at the top levels of government, there has to be people who are not Taliban as well. Then at that point, there are chances for recognition. Um, on the women's education and work, we are getting closer. On the bringing people at the top level of the government who are not Taliban, the Taliban have not accepted that yet.
All right, just to add to Farrukh's question, Mr. Farhadi, even if these conditions are sort of being met, and perhaps a country thinks that this is okay now for them to recognize the Taliban regime, do you think that they will still do it irrespective of the fact that whether or not US actually has done it or not? Isn't that sort of maybe a more important prerequisite to Taliban's recognition than all of these conditions? Everyone's just looking at the US and waiting whether or not they'll recognize the government, and then they'll follow suit.
If we get to those 2 points, and maybe another 2 or 3 smaller issues, the US might recognize the Taliban.
Do you think any country can do it without the US's recognition?
Well, yes, other countries could do it, but what's most important is recognition by the United Nations, so that Afghanistan can retrieve its membership in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, where it can have finally access to the amount of money that was reserved for it for the COVID aid. It's $460 million. It could print money, print currency, etc. Recognition of countries is important, but countries are dealing with the Taliban already. What's important is at what point can they retrieve the UN seat, which gives membership to Bretton Woods institutions, in all this new situation where everybody is really busy with Ukraine, even in Washington.
Mr. Farhadi, obviously we talked about the inclusiveness of the government, and earlier you highlighted that, of course, governmental affairs are not being dealt by Taliban to par. Then, of course, there is one thing that is missing, and that is the inclusion of the technocrats. So people like you yourself, we highlighted it in previous programs as well. Why not people like you who are genuine patriots and who hasn't got any sides to pick or choose? The only concern you have is people of Afghanistan. Shouldn't the Taliban regime be including people like yourself who are constantly advising on the televisions, but they need to sit with them and obviously talk a way out? And shouldn't it be considered as an inclusive step forward for future to be accepted as a country?
And the question is not merely should or shouldn't, but the question is why haven't they done it already?
Yeah.
It has been going on for quite some time, sir, and we have been talking about this. Why are they not doing it?
The Taliban are convinced that they can handle it alone. That's their psychology. The Taliban have not really opened up at the highest levels of government for other people to come in. And as far as I am personally concerned, now I feel that my voice is more effective on interviews than being in one single post in Kabul. It's better to be independent. It's better to have a voice where even the Taliban of all levels hear what we say here, and if they pick up some of the things we say, we would have done our job.
Right.
Right.
But no matter what, sir, we will keep on rooting for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tariq
Thank you
Farhadi,
very
for
much.
joining
We
us
all
and
root
being a
for the
part of the
people of
debate.
Afghanistan.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. With reference to, of course, what is going on in the world, there is so much that still has question marks on it. But what is important, of course, is to keep secure in terms of what we really want for the people of our own country, for the people in other countries as well, and to keep highlighting issues as they are. And whatever goes on in Afghanistan is, of course, very, very tragic, and it's something that should be of concern to everyone. And in terms of their concern, we should see real change, and that goes both for the international community and the Taliban regime in Afghanistan as well. Let's see that the coming days bring in good news, hopefully for all of us and also specifically the people in Afghanistan. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow once again at 7 only on PTV World.